Hi, and welcome back to Just Ask the Question. I am your host, Brian Karam, and with me today, I got to say, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Jennifer Jenkins, who's the founder of Education We Stand for the last year. That's been her organization, 10 years in public education, and her husband is a civics teacher, so I appreciate that a lot. But I want to start out with just asking this question. I don't know if you've ever listened to George Carlin, but he had a wonderful monologue at one point in time where he said, the people who run the country only want you stupid enough to operate the machinery. That are smart enough to operate the machinery, and that's about as much education as they want you to get. Now, in reading you have had an op-ed on the Hill recently. In reading that op-ed, I have a sneaking suspicion that you may feel the same way, but I'd like to ask you, do you find that the people running this country give a damn about education, or is it just they just want you smart enough to operate the machinery?
Yeah, I obviously completely agree with that sentiment, unfortunately. But I believe wholeheartedly that the Trump administration doesn't want our citizenry to be educated. They don't want stronger schools. They just want people to be underfunded, uninformed, and just too broken to fight back against them.
How effective have they been in doing it so far, and how effective do you think they can be, and how much more do we need to see out of the opposition?
I think right now they've been effective in the sense of creating disinformation and misinformation campaigns and strategies that have overwhelmingly fatigued the electorate. I think that's pretty obvious. I don't think we can refute that. I think that there is a lot of time for the opposition being spent either defending positions or re-explaining positions, or trying to get back to basic facts and telling the truth and fact checking everything that comes out of this administration, which is frustrating, because the more time we spend on that, the less we get to spend on proactive mitigation strategies, and making things better for our kids and for our future. What I really think is going to be critical here, though, in the opposition is actually Republicans themselves. And I say that because at some point it goes too far, right? We've already seen a little bit of it. It's not enough, but at some point it goes too far, and it starts to actually hurt Republicans where they live. And when it comes to public education, I'm speaking specifically to, rural communities. Republicans in rural communities can't stand up and defend the dismantling of the Department of Education, because that hurts their communities the most. And so the more we see Republicans willing to grow a backbone and get a spine and stand up and push back, the more power we will have together as a collective opposition.
Have you seen that? Have you seen? Because what I see from covering the White House and what I see from Republicans is either they abandon their party or they're quiet about it. They'll talk to me off the record and say, "Yeah, Brian, I agree. This is horrible," but on the record they'll follow the president right down his rabbit hole. So, are you seeing it? I guess at the local and state level, are you seeing more people willing to put up or shut up?
I think so. Yeah. I live in Brevard County, Florida, so we are the founding county of Moms for Liberty. I often like to describe us, we're the Space Coast, and I say we launch people into space, but we've also launched the hate group Moms for Liberty, and we have tied for the most January 6th arrests per capita with Miami in the state of Florida. So we are.
Woohoo! There's something to cheer.
Yeah, we're an interesting bag. But I've seen resistance here where Democrats are significantly outnumbered. When we have our
Wow.
protests every couple of weeks, we do the national protests right here in Brevard County, and they're growing stronger and stronger. And just this weekend, we had over 3,000 people out at it, which is really incredible for this.
Aren't you the same county where they said if you protested too heavy, they'd shoot you graveyard dead?
Yeah, that's our lovely constitutional sheriff, Wayne Ivey. Yes. Yes, sir.
God bless him.
Yeah.
There's something you said I wanted to touch on in your article in the Hill. It says, under the banner of culture wars, Florida has censored classroom discussions, politicized school boards, driven teachers out of the profession, undermining not just what students learn, but whether they learn at all. It's a blueprint for control, not for education. Yeah, that's what the part that made me think of George Carlin. But book banning, you lead the nation in. God bless you. Um, how specifically does your group suggest you fight back against that? Because there are people that would love to, and I speak to people every day who would say, we'd love to do something against it. What do we do? So, what do you recommend that they do?
Well, I think it's important for people to understand. So my organization was founded to help support school board candidates, most especially in swing states across the country, get elected. And it's a nonpartisan organization, and I mean that sincerely. We've offered our endorsement to Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. But the reality is we want to have people in place at that local level who are going to make the best decision for their students. So that's step one. Do whatever you can to get involved in your local elections to make sure that those safeguards in place. The other thing too, and you took an excerpt from the article in The Hill, but I really want people to understand that this culture war, especially when it comes about book bans and things of that nature, it's not about parental choice and freedom, like they say. It's about forcing children to learn fake history, for them to be able to ban books, for them to censor teachers. It's not about freedom, it's about government overreach, and it's about taxpayer-funded indoctrination. And we can't be shy about using those terms and those words, because that's exactly what it is. There's so much power in speaking out and in numbers. And there's communities all across this country where students have actually stepped up and started a rebellion with their school boards for the books being banned. And they've been very successful, and those books have ended up back on the shelves. So we need to continue to point at history and this repeating itself, and just keep pushing back and calling out the hypocrisy, because the reality is that this isn't about protecting kids, right? Like if this is about protecting kids, we would be protesting things like lockdowns and active shooter drills, but we're scared of books on a shelf.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many. I have not yet met a book that killed a kid, but that's just me. Right. So tell me exactly, give me an example of what you mean by hypocrisy. Of the hypocrisy that you've seen from, school boards or from government.
Yeah, I mean, well, just for example, for the book ban conversation, there are so many more threats in our school system on a daily basis that I can't even talk about some of them, honestly, because some of them are shielded by security. And the founders of this organization, Moms for Liberty, were school board members, right? So they can't claim ignorance and not knowing what goes on every single day in a school, what actual threats are to our children. And so to pretend that the pages of a novel are really the most important pressing issue for us to attack for our children every single day is the most ridiculous thing in the world. And then the hypocrisy of an organization like that, their founders being caught in sex scandals, in LGBTQ relationships while they're banning LGBTQ books and content. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's not
the one that comes to mind, and I think you meant, I got to read through it again, but I thought you mentioned it. The idea that if you were a slave, you developed, personal benefit skills.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean, my God,
it's a work study program, according to the extreme right.
Yeah, and so what specifically, is there a moment, a trigger that occurred to you where you said, hey, look, I got to get involved, this is nuts, that started this organization? What brought you to the precipice of having to do this?
Yeah, how much time do you have? No. So I worked in this.
Hey, I've covered Trump for the last 8 years. I got the time, baby.
Yeah. I started in the school system right out of grad school. My husband is a middle school teacher, and I ran for school board in 2020, just genuinely to help support our educators to get better pay here in the lowest paid state of the nation, Florida, and to get more equitable services for students with disabilities. And I found myself, unfortunately, in the middle of COVID. And it was a whirlwind for me. And when I won that election, that opponent went on to be one of the co-founders of Moms for Liberty. And so I quickly found myself in the birthplace of public education culture wars. And I went from an educator who wanted to just fight simply for public education values that I cared about, for the organization I cared about, for the colleagues that I cared about, my students, into being pushed into a position of being a political advocate and a civil rights advocate. And I couldn't look away. I was harassed and intimidated relentlessly. I had protests at my home. They had sent me multiple death threats. They had vandalized my property. They had made false DCF claims against me, saying I was abusing my daughter. They followed me around with investigators and made false websites and, called me mentally ill. They called me a pedophile, a child abuser. They called me a whore multiple times. Public officials had done so. And I just...
Yes, a kinder, gentler nation. Yeah,
yeah. The good core.
Been there, done that. Yeah,
Good example.
I feel you.
But I just have always had the personality that when you push me, I'm going to push right back and I'm going to come back stronger. And so I felt the need to defend the students and the staff that I was sworn to represent. And I never backed down. And as my term came to an end, I knew that there was this significant deficit in the area of helping school board candidates. I watched Moms for Liberty infiltrate not only our county, but our state. I knew that they were heavily funded or about to bleed over state lines and create this national rhetoric and message. And I just felt like somebody, if not me, then who, somebody needs to step up and be loud about it and defend our public education system.
So one of the things I've heard often in the White House and, walking through the hallowed halls of a place that I used to respect quite a bit, is in the current administration that Moms for Liberty and what these people are trying to teach is actual education. And you're trying to indoctrinate people. You want to be able to have transgender kids, you go to school female or male and you come back male or female, as if it's instantaneous. And as if a 5 or 6 year old can make that decision. But nonetheless, these are the things that I hear on a daily basis. And one of the things that I find that I'd love you to speak to is the education that I had going up. Civics was huge. I mean, that was part of what we were taught. Science, math. And these things have been demonized. When I talk to people now, especially from some of the people that are in the current administration, it's almost as if science is magic. It doesn't count. We have RFK Jr. with the worm in his brain, who has decided that, to fire everybody in the vaccine department. And the education is lacking for people to understand exactly what it is that's the real issue. And so, I mean, there have been people who have said this all started with George Bush's wonderful, Nobody Left Behind movement, which became Everyone Left Behind. I won't speak to that. But how do you see an education, for example, that you had growing up compared to an education that your kids would be getting now in Florida? What are the fundamental changes that these people have been able to instigate that you need to fight against to let people know what it is exactly that they're dealing with? What is it?
Yeah, I think the most important issue is just to always remember when something comes out of their mouth, it's probably 90% false, right? And so when you say...
Well, that's a guiding point, yeah, but
yeah.
that's...
When they're
I usually go a little
attacking-
higher if it's Trump, but, go ahead. Yeah, that's...
they attack like fact-based curriculums like science, right? They
Yes.
don't like proof. They don't like data. And I mean, you spoke
Well, they
to that.
create their own.
They create this false outrage. They like to have fear-mongering and talking points that people can just consume and don't care to fact check themselves. My favorite is always that we don't say the Pledge of Allegiance in school. We say it every single morning. My favorite is that we don't teach cursive. Yes, we do. It's a state standard in certain grade levels. So yeah, it's very frustrating. I always tell people who actually come at me with those statements and refuse to take it as facts and truth. I say, go ahead, donate some time to our schools. We would love you to volunteer. But the reality is the Trump administration, it's they're using that as a scapegoat, right? It sounds really good to say we need to focus on math and reading. Our scores are low. We need to stop focusing on this woke nonsense, blah, 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 because people can consume that. But that's not really what their goal is, right? There is literally no plan. Linda McMahon and Trump have never put out a plan to improve math and reading scores. They just talk about it should be the focus. So that doesn't mean anything to us. That doesn't do anything. They don't show us where their money's going to go, and they don't show us how they're going to improve it. So I think that's number one for people to recognize. But the other thing too is this conversation that they're continuously having about bringing education back to the states. Again, it's 90% false, right? Because education
Explain
decisions,
how.
I'm sorry?
Explain how.
Yeah,
That's
so the majority of education decisions are already at our state and local level, right? So shifting education to the states isn't about freedom. It's about setting up this system where the rich are going to get richer and the rest of our kids are just going to be left to fend for themselves. It's not about offering state rights. It's about breaking the system. And as a Floridian, I can explain what happens when this is fully taking place, when states are really, really in control of their education. We are severely underfunded when we allow states to make decisions about the educational budget all by themselves with no oversight. We end up with whitewashed history, banning of AP African American history, an attempt to ban AP psychology. We are number one in the country for banned books. We have the largest class sizes in the United States of America, and year after year our SAT scores are dropping, and we are literally the lowest paid teachers in the country.
What's your average class size there?
I would be lying if I gave you a number for the state. It's different everywhere. But there was a class size amendment that the voters had passed a couple of years ago, and Florida intentionally created loopholes so that they can completely ignore that, and no longer be held accountable and have fines for it. So
On average, I mean, above 25?
oh yeah. Our middle school and high school classes, many of them have like 35 kids in them.
Wow.
Yeah.
One teacher to 35.
Yeah.
1 to 35.
Yeah,
Jeez.
and they have 7 classes a day.
Yeah.
We've got over 150 kids a day for one teacher, and we pretend that we're going to make these significant academic changes for our kids, and then we blame our teachers for it.
Yeah, that's excellent point, because when you cut from the federal funding, what you're actually doing is removing the ability to teach. As you said, most of the control is already at the state level. What the federal funds allow you to do is to invest in the actual education thereof that you couldn't do before. So it facilitates greater ability to buy books and hire teachers, decent teachers, and to move forward. I get that, and that's a good point. But you made a point that I really want to talk a little bit about, is the separation between rich and the poor. What this does, removing, and correct me if I'm wrong, what this does by removing federal funding is that if you're rich, you're going to be able to afford an education. You'll be able to buy that education. But the public education, affordable to the middle class and the lower class, will be impacted the most. Yes?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And we're already seeing that. There are plenty of states who have expanded voucher programs. Again, Florida, always leading the way for bad decisions. We spent.
Well, look, I grew up in Kentucky. We're not far behind.
You're doing better than us. This past year we spent over $3 billion in the new voucher expansion program. That's $3 billion that could have went to our local community public schools that are struggling. And often when this administration is pushing this narrative that vouchers are opening the doors for our low-income families and students, the reality is they're being left standing outside, right? The doors are being locked on them legitimately, because these vouchers don't even go to those low-income families. They're going to families who can already afford that private school. It's just a handout for the wealthy. And the one thing that's not getting reported on enough, and I think because it hasn't happened long enough for there to be enough information and data. But a lot of these private schools have, when the voucher came out universally in the state of Florida, they have increased their tuition. So they take that voucher, but now that school is even more expensive on top of that voucher. And so the same exact kids are accessing that school that were accessing it in the first place, which is our wealthy families.
Yeesh. So I would suspect reading skills, math skills, science skills are plummeting, or are they are they getting better in Florida?
Yeah. I mean, we're not doing well, and you said something in the last question that I kind of want to talk about when you were talking about the funding. It kind of overlaps with what you just brought up. It's so easy for this administration to talk about our students doing poorly, right? Because they're using data post-COVID. Yes, all of our students did poorly because of COVID, regardless if they were in a state that didn't lock down very long versus a state that did. We can have that debate all day. But the answer is yes, universally across the board, our kids were impacted by COVID. Everyone was impacted by COVID. But the only reason certain states were able to bounce back so well was because of federal funding given by the Biden administration. Ron DeSantis here in the state of Florida waited until the very last day to be able to apply for those funds. Luckily, he did, because Florida ended up being one of the states that actually bounced back the best because we put those funds to use. But that right there is proof that we need funding and money from the federal government to be able to implement intensive reading and math programs to get our kids to catch back up. It's not going to happen just in 3 or 4 years. It's going to take time. This is an entire generation of kids who lost some of their fundamental basic education because we were in lockdown.
Well, yeah, they have, but so did their parents. At least those who voted for voted for this mess. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have heard numerous times how Jesus has come down to bless the masses, but so we don't need education. I have heard that on more than one occasion. But my question. What is the path forward? If someone wants to get involved, someone wants to help, what do you recommend that they do?
I mean, first and foremost, if you have the time, I would say attend a school board meeting. It's really important for you to get involved locally. Number one, even know who your elected officials are, and no shame if you don't.
Oh, what a concept. Come on, Jennifer. You're asking too much there.
Well, I mean, in all defense of working parents, I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. I wasn't engaged before I became a school board member myself. I got to be honest. I mean, you're very, very busy. I had to work 2 jobs since I left grad school because I live in Florida and they don't pay teachers well. I had a little one at home. I was taking care of an ill mom. And so sometimes it really is really difficult for you to pay attention. It's not the priority of your life. But it's time for us to make it the priority of our life, especially if you have children in public schools. So if you have time, please consider attending a public school meeting just to see who's on there, how they interact, and start to formulate relationships. If you have an ability to be a participant in your PTA, do it. They are strong. They're heavily involved in their schools. Lots of school districts have curriculum review committees. They have book review committees. There's ways to be 100% involved on some of these issues, and then there's ways to be gently involved by just being an observer and keeping a balance check on some of the things that are happening in your local government. And run for office.
There's a concept. Here's my question. I have a friend of mine. Her daughter is a teacher, and she has 3 or 4 times a year pushes out, to ask for contributions to buy paper and pen and. I was flabbergasted the first time I got this request. Of course, I gave money, but I was like, what happened to the, that wasn't, when I was growing up, that wasn't a problem. You didn't have a problem with, I didn't need to buy paste. It was little Timmy 2 desks over that was eating the paste, but I never had to worry about the paste being there. And so today I look at it, and some of the funds that, what teachers are having to do now, in addition to teach, is to fundraise, be weapons experts, and I don't know how that works. And you got to tell me, man, because I'm sitting there confused myself. And look, this is a full disclosure. I was the president of an elementary and a middle school PTA, and we never had those problems when my kids were in school. So, now I'm looking at it going, what the hell happened in just the last 10 years?
Yeah, education cuts have been tremendous year after year after year. You'll hear often from governors like DeSantis that they've invested the most in public education than ever before. But again, when you look at the trends and the data, just because you put more into nothing doesn't make you the best. So no, it's a reality. As an educator, this is so insignificant, but it gives a really good picture. When you go to the copier to make copies for your kids, you have a limit. There's a number on there that rolls down every single time you print. You have a
really
a year, yeah. And so when those teachers are asking for things like printer paper, they really mean it, because otherwise it's going to end up coming out of their pocket at some point. The other thing, though, other than just basic school supplies, the majority of our teachers who are working in low-income areas are legitimately purchasing food, clothes, shoes, basic necessities for these kids and for their families, not because they have to, but because they want to, because they understand that their kids are never going to learn if their basic needs aren't being met. And currently, right now, we don't have an administration that cares about actually meeting the basic needs of our kids across this country.
Yes, I read a recent study that said that if you really want to impact education of young kids, make sure they have a breakfast. They're a full tummy when they come
100%.
to school.
Yeah.
And do you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, for the legislators who debate school meal programs, I dare them to spend a day with a 5-year-old who hasn't eaten in 2 days or has had sparse meals that they shared with their family. I dare them to look that child in the face and say, you don't deserve this. And of course they'll make excuses that, no, it's not that kid, it's other kids and whatever. But, where's the moral line? I think as an elected official, it is your duty before you make decisions to touch the actual places, spaces, and see the faces of the people that you're impacting. And when we're talking about children, I have no idea how you can rationalize taking away the most basic needs.
See, that breaks my heart right there, because I think of all the stuff that I did as a volunteer to help kids, when my kids were in school, and it tears me apart that you're telling me that that they can't even get a meal in the morning.
Yeah, and it's hard for me too, right? Because then the next criticism comes, well, it's the parents, and they blame the parents. But I've met many of these parents, and many of these parents are good, hardworking people. So many of them have 3 jobs sometimes. These kids are in daycare all day because their parents have to work to be able to make ends meet. Sometimes they skip their own meals. They're skipping their medication. They're skipping their parents' medication to be able to feed their kids. It's not a good situation. Nobody's happy about it. These parents aren't proud about it. But just because they're struggling doesn't make them bad people, and doesn't mean that you shouldn't help them or their children.
I agree 100%. So how do I'll finish up this way? How do people get involved? How do they reach out to you? How can you help?
Yeah, so we're Educated We Stand. Our website is educatedwestand.com. There's a tab there if you want to get involved. We are doing our best to link volunteers to other organizations that are already working in certain places where we're supporting candidates. This is a collective effort. We are partnered with many organizations who are already pushing against this. Reach out, we'll point you in the right direction if we're not exactly the right space for you. But if you are a candidate who's looking to run for school board and looking for support in your next race, please reach out to us. We would love to help you, and we're here for you. And just be brave, be strong, stand up. You're doing the right thing, and you're on the right side of history.
If you had Donald Trump in front of you right now, or his National Director of Education, what would you like to say or ask them?
What can I say on this program?
Anything you want. Anything you want, Jennifer.
I'm a New York City girl at heart, so I'm thinking of really inappropriate words.
A woman after my own heart. Go ahead.
My first gut feeling is cut the shit. Cut the shit. Pick on somebody your own size. Stop messing with our kids. Do the right thing. I know that they're not going to listen, but I'd have a lot more choice words than that, but I'll save that for private.
Have you testified? Have you been able to go before Congress, or would that be on your game plan?
No, I haven't done that yet. I did go up for Linda McMahon's confirmation hearing, although they strategically had it in a room with 20 chairs, so I was in the overflow room. I try to participate in any way that I can, but no, I've never had the opportunity. But man, yeah, that would be really significant. I mean, I would love to be able to share my story, my experience watching the far right monster really start, and how they infiltrated and continue to grow. I think it's important for people to understand the reality behind that.
I have a congressman I'll introduce you to. What would you, honestly, Linda McMahon, when you talk about what's the most egregious thing that you think this administration and she has done for education? Or against education, I guess, would be the more correct way of asking it.
Accept the role. She has no background in education, no experience in public schools, no history for advocating for students or educators. She has no right being in that position. And
Hey, come on, WWE is a great way to. I mean, I've been to these schools. Come on.
yeah,
Yeah.
No, the first major effort of cutting the staff by 50% with having literally no idea what IDEA stands for and accidentally calling AI technologies A1 steak sauce. The list goes on and on. She's completely inexperienced and irresponsible and has no business making decisions about the future of our children.
Oh, God, I love ending on that note.
You're welcome.
Jennifer, I want to thank you for joining us, and love to have you back if you're God willing and willing to talk. As it unwinds and goes through, a lot of this is going to end up being seen, heard, or voted on in Congress. We'd love to have you back to talk about the specifics, but I agree with you 1,000%. Having taught, having coached, having mentored kids, I find it one of the most egregious things that this government is doing. And so God bless you for doing it, and we'll do what we can to get the word out for you. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, this is Just Ask the Question. I am your host, Brian Karen. We want to thank Jennifer Jenkins for joining us, and we will catch you next time.